Last weekend, my friends and I, late 20s, slightly over-caffeinated and buzzing with excitement, were gearing up for a concert we'd been hyping for weeks. Not just any concert, mind you, but one of those shows that somehow manages to sell out in minutes and make you question your life choices while waiting in line for hours. The band we were seeing had this cult-like following, and tickets had been impossible to snag. Somehow, against all odds, and thanks to my friend Matt's lightning-fast clicking skills, we had snagged 4 tickets that would actually get us in before the opening act was halfway done. Score 1 for adulthood and borderline unhealthy obsession that we arrived at the venue about 2 hours early, figuring an early arrival would get us closer to the stage. Rookie mistake. Or maybe not. Depends on how you define early. When we got there, the line was already chaos incarnate. Imagine sardines, but replace the tin with a throng of sweaty, excited humans, and instead of oil, you have the unmistakable smell of overpriced hot dogs and excitement. The air was sharp with a chill that went straight through your jacket, and people were jostling for position as though the fate of the world depended on being in the front 50 feet of the line to cope with the cold and the sheer madness. We spotted a nearby vendor selling hot tea and grabbed some. Nothing fancy, just basic Earl Grey and peppermint, but in that moment, it felt like liquid gold. Holding a steaming cup of tea in your hands is underrated, by the way. It warms your fingers, your soul, and apparently, it doubles as a defensive weapon in crowded lines. Who knew? We huddled together, sipping carefully because, let's be honest, nobody wants to be the person spilling scalding tea in the middle of a human sardine can. Matt started talking about the band's setlist rumors. Lisa was scrolling through her phone showing us the latest fan theories, and I was just trying to exist without getting elbowed in the ribs by someone else's oversized backpack. Life goals, really, everything was going fine. Peaceful even. Well, as peaceful as standing outside in near-freezing temperatures while hundreds of sweaty strangers jostle for space can be. That peace, as you might expect, was short-lived. Enter the line cutters. They appeared like a storm rolling in, a group of girls, all in their 20s, who seemed to operate under the unspoken rule that lines are merely a suggestion. They weaved through the crowd with the precision of a synchronized swimming team, except instead of water, it was humans, and instead of elegance, there was a lot of elbowing, shoulder shoving, and not-so-subtle sighs from the poor souls in their path. One girl, in particular, seemed to have a radar for my exact spot in line. I don't know if she actually saw us sipping tea and plotting world domination in our heads, but she honed in like a heat-seeking missile. First, she nudged past Lisa, then Matt, then me, without a single excuse me. My normally chill personality, which, let me tell you, I take pride in, was beginning to crack under the relentless onslaught. 45 minutes of freezing, polite standing, and now this? My patience was teetering on the edge that I tried to maintain decorum at first. A gentle nudge back, like, nothing crazy, just a friendly, hey, personal space exists, but she scoffed, her eyes rolling so hard I was worried they'd escape orbit. She didn't slow down. She didn't acknowledge anything resembling manners. She just kept moving forward as though she owned the line. And that, my friends, was the breaking point. I clenched my teacup a little tighter, eyes tracking her movements, calculating angles, mental notes being made. She moves left, too slow. She moves right, target acquired. Slight tilt. Yes, this might work. Okay, maybe not quite that dramatic, but you get the idea. My inner petty justice warrior was waking up from a long, civilized nap. And so, the stage was set. The humans were packed, the tea was hot, and my inner chaos was ready to make its debut. By now, the line had officially become a test of endurance, patience, and personal space boundaries. The girl and her equally audacious friends weren't just cutting in. They were practically performing a masterclass in subtle intimidation. You know the type. The ones who smile sweetly while elbowing your ribs and bumping your coffee cup like it's an afterthought in their carefully choreographed chaos that I tried to maintain my composure. I mean, really I did. I sipped my tea like a civilized adult, letting the warmth soothe my rapidly escalating irritation. Lisa leaned over, whispering, "Just let it go. It's not worth it." But clearly, she didn't understand the intricate dance of lines or sacred etiquette. Matt, ever the instigator, snorted behind me and muttered something about tea justice. That only made me smirk and simultaneously tighten my grip on the cup. The girl's tactics were relentless. First, it was a gentle nudge, testing the waters. Then came the elbow, which she executed so skillfully it would have earned points in a fencing match. Next, a deliberate step on my toe. Okay, maybe accidental, but I'll never know for sure. And all of this was accompanied by that infuriating smirk, the kind that screams, "I know I'm being obnoxious and I don't care to AT this point." I started keeping mental notes, like a coach watching a particularly frustrating sports game. If she goes left, I can give a gentle push. Right. Nope. Can't risk the hot tea spilling. Forward. Perfect opportunity for strategic, tactical adjustments. My friends caught on, their stifled laughter barely contained as I whispered updates under my breath. "She's approaching. She thinks she owns this line." Calculating angle. Meanwhile, the crowd around us was blissfully unaware, or maybe they just didn't care, about the escalating war between me and the line-cutting queen. People jostled past, complained about the cold, muttered about the length of the line, but nobody intervened. This was a silent battlefield, and apparently, only I had noticed, and then it happened, the moment that would test the limits of my patience. She targeted me directly, her eyes narrowing, like a predator honing in on prey. My internal monologue went into overdrive. This is it. No more warnings. If she pushes past me again, there will be consequences. Consequences. I gave her a small, polite nudge, my final attempt at civility. Just enough to say, "Hey, personal boundaries exist, maybe respect them?" But no, she scoffed, rolled her eyes, and pressed forward like she was on a mission from the universe to prove she could annoy every human in a 10-foot radius. At this point, I considered loudly announcing, "Hey, you're in my personal space." But I held back, because let's be real, I wanted to see this unfold with a little subtlety. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for this exact moment, the perfect opportunity presented itself. She leaned forward, still shoving, still oblivious to the basic rules of civility, and my hot tea, my literal lifeline in this frozen chaos, tipped ever so slightly. Not enough to cause permanent damage, just enough to make her realize that actions have consequences. Time seemed to slow. I watched the tiny splash arc through the air like some slow-motion movie effect, landing squarely on the front of her jacket. Her reaction was immediate, a yelp of surprise, eyes widening, mouth opening in a silent scream of indignation. I tried to keep my own expression casual, raising a hand in a half-hearted, "Oh my gosh, sorry," gesture. But inside, I felt a surge of victorious satisfaction that was almost unfairly satisfying. Her friends stared in horror, perhaps realizing that their perfect plan of line domination had just been thwarted by tea. Not a fight, not a security guard, just a humble cup of Earl Grey wielded with precision. Meanwhile, my friends lost it. Matt almost choked on his own tea laughing. Lisa giggled so hard she snorted, and I had to fight a grin to maintain my innocent bystander facade. The line-cutting girl muttered something under her breath, something unintelligible but very clearly angry, and scurried back to her group, suddenly a little less confident in her mission to conquer the line that IT was petty. It was small, but oh, it was perfect. Standing there, sipping my now slightly lukewarm tea, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the beverage. There's a rare kind of satisfaction in seeing someone get just a taste of their own chaos, without causing any real harm, of course. It's like tiny justice delivered, just enough to remind people that rules exist for a reason, and sometimes karma comes in the form of liquid refreshments. And so, the line cleared, my blood pressure returned to manageable levels, and I realized that while I hadn't moved an inch closer to the concert yet, I had won a small, glorious battle. A battle that, to be honest, made standing in the freezing cold feel a little more worth it by the time the universe presented me with the perfect opportunity. My inner chaos strategist was fully engaged. This wasn't just a crowded line anymore. It was a battlefield of wills. The girl, the line-cutting queen, had honed in on me like a heat-seeking missile, her determination to shove past unwavering. My friends were in on the silent countdown, eyes darting between her and my cup of tea, clearly sensing what was about to happen. The air around us was tense, a mix of cold evening chill and anticipatory energy. She leaned forward again, elbowing her way like a professional negotiator with zero ethics. I tightened my grip on the teacup. It was warm, comforting, and about to become my instrument of justice. I had rehearsed this move in my head for the last few minutes. Not out of malice, mind you, but out of necessity. You see, etiquette demands that one must defend their personal space when violated repeatedly. And what better way than with a splash of harmless liquid that doubles as an exclamation mark in the language of back off? As she shoved past, I lost my balance. Just a subtle tilt, nothing extreme, hardly noticeable to anyone who wasn't watching closely. But the tea obeyed gravity like a perfect accomplice. A small arc of warm liquid left the cup and landed squarely on her jacket. Not enough to scald her, but enough to make her yelp, a sound somewhere between shock and horror. Time slowed. Her eyes widened, her mouth formed an O of disbelief, and her hand immediately darted to dab at the newly minted stain. The world around us seemed to blur. All I could see was her moment of panic, the unmistakable realization that actions, indeed, have consequences that I, of course, played the part of the innocent bystander perfectly. "Oh no, I'm so sorry, it's super crowded," I exclaimed, the kind of apologetic tone that sounds sincere but also conveniently absolves me of any real guilt. She muttered something under her breath, something bitter, angry, and vaguely threatening, but she didn't come back to retaliate. Instead, she scurried back to her group like a defeated general. Her ambitious line-cutting campaign abruptly ended. The immediate aftermath was glorious. Matt nearly fell over laughing, spilling a little of his tea in the process. Lisa was snickering uncontrollably, eyes watering as she tried to regain composure. My small victory had been witnessed in full, and it was hilarious to everyone involved, except, of course, the unfortunate recipient of my perfectly timed tea justice. I couldn't help but feel a flush of satisfaction, not just because she stopped pushing, but because the situation had been resolved without anyone getting hurt, embarrassed beyond reason, or involving security. Sometimes the universe rewards patience and strategic thinking with small, poetic victories, and this was mine. She returned to her friends, muttering and probably vowing some sort of quiet revenge. But as she glanced back at me one last time, I could tell something had shifted. Her confidence, previously at line-cutting, world-dominating levels, had deflated. Perhaps she realized that while she could push past strangers in line, she couldn't push past someone unwilling to back down. And there we were, a small circle of friends, sipping our tea, feeling just a little warmer in more ways than one. The line around us remained chaotic, people shoving and complaining, but our little corner had a newfound serenity. Victory, in this case, came in a hot cup with a dash of petty justice that I reflected briefly on the absurdity of it all. Who gets satisfaction from spilling tea? Me, apparently. Who feels slightly guilty for enjoying it? Also me, but only for about 30 seconds. And who learned a lesson about line etiquette? Hopefully her. Small, inconsequential life lessons are underrated. I've decided as the minutes ticked by. The line continued its slow crawl toward the venue entrance. The girl stayed with her group, no longer attempting to cut. My friends and I exchanged smug glances, silently acknowledging our tiny victory. There's something to be said about the justice that doesn't make a scene, doesn't require confrontation, and yet delivers a perfectly balanced dose of karmic satisfaction. Finally, the line inched forward, and we took another step closer to the music, the warmth of our tea, and my small act of revenge, keeping spirits high. Little did we know, the concert itself would be amazing, but in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the cold, not the chaos, not even the girl's death glare, which lingered in my memory like a badge of honor. Sometimes, life is just about the little wins. And this was mine. The line, finally, began to inch forward. Slowly, painfully slowly. But in that tiny movement, there was triumph. Not just because we were getting closer to the concert, but because the girl's reign of line-cutting terror had been effectively neutralized. I could feel a glow of satisfaction radiating from my chest, right alongside the fading warmth of my tea. It was one of those moments where you realize that petty, harmless acts of justice can feel unexpectedly empowering. My friends were buzzing. Matt was still snickering, nudging Lisa, and whispering, "Did you see her face?" Classic. Lisa was giggling too, her phone already out, presumably recording the entire ordeal for posterity, or blackmail. I wasn't sure which. I tried to maintain a low profile, but I couldn't help the subtle smirk tugging at my lips. The girl had backed off, scuttled back to her group, and was now murmuring complaints no one could hear over the chaos of the line. The universe had delivered a small, perfectly timed lesson in humility. As we shuffled forward, I reflected on the absurdity of the moment. Here I was, late 20s, standing in a freezing concert line, secretly celebrating a tear-elated victory over a stranger. My life, in the grand scheme of things, was fine. Career steady, friends reliable, concert tickets secured. But somehow, this tiny episode had become a highlight of my weekend. Sometimes the little things stick with you more than the big ones, and this definitely fell into that category. The girls' group was still ahead of us, but their pace had slowed. The audacity, the confidence, they'd all vanished like steam from a freshly poured cup of tea. I couldn't help but feel a pang of smug pride. Justice, in its smallest form, had been served, and no one had been harmed. No security guards called, no dramatic yelling, just a subtle splash, a quick apology, and a moment that would live forever in the private memory of those involved. Meanwhile, the rest of the crowd seemed oblivious. People continued their muttering, complaining about the cold, checking their phones, debating the best strategy to get through the line faster. But my friends and I had our own little bubble of triumph. We joked quietly about tea warfare, whispered strategies for the next time someone tried to cut in, and laughed about how absurdly satisfying it felt to reclaim a sliver of personal space. Eventually, we reached the final checkpoint. Tickets scanned, security check completed, the last barrier between us and the music. The moment we stepped inside, the warmth of the venue hit us like a physical force. The cold, the waiting, the line-cutting chaos. All of it melted away in the rush of music, lights, and energy that only a live concert can deliver. And yet, even as the first chord struck, I couldn't help but think back to that tiny, victorious moment outside. There's a strange kind of pride in knowing you handled a frustrating situation with humor, subtlety, and a touch of poetic justice. As the opening act played, we found our spots, mugs of tea long emptied but hearts still warmed by the earlier victory. My friends kept nudging me, whispering, "You were a hero out there." And while I rolled my eyes, I couldn't deny the truth. Sometimes, in the small skirmishes of everyday life, you get a chance to assert yourself without creating chaos, and those moments are golden. Throughout the concert, I noticed the line-cutting girl and her group in the crowd. They weren't glaring, thankfully, but I could tell the confidence wasn't the same. The moment had left its mark. And honestly, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and amusement imagining them replaying the incident in their heads, probably muttering about that weird guy with the tea. By the time the headliner hit the stage, the earlier tension had completely faded. We were laughing, singing along, and feeling completely immersed in the music. And yet, in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but smile at the memory of the small victory that had set the tone for the night. The tea incident had become a story, a private little anecdote that reminded me, and my friends, why sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest impact on our mood, our sense of justice, and our weekend memories. In retrospect, it was more than just a funny story. It was a lesson in patience, strategy, and the subtle art of standing your ground. And maybe, just maybe, it was a reminder that even in moments of minor chaos, a little clever thinking and a bit of liquid courage can turn frustration into triumph. By the end of the night, as the final notes faded and the crowd began to disperse, I realized something important. The concert was amazing, yes, but the little moments, the ones that made us laugh, feel victorious, or shake our heads in disbelief, were the memories we'd carry forever. And the tea incident? That was officially one of them. By the time the headliner took the stage, the earlier chaos of the line felt like a distant memory. The lights, the thumping bass, and the sea of fans singing in unison created a perfect bubble of joy. The cold, the impatience, and even the line-cutting girl, all of it faded into background noise. And yet, I couldn't help but glance around and quietly smile every time I thought about that little moment of tea justice. It was one of those things that seemed insignificant at the time, but ended up being the highlight of the weekend. Not the loud music, not the crowd surfing, not even the confetti cannons blasting during the encore. Just a small, harmless act that reminded me I could stand up for myself without creating drama. Sometimes, the smallest victories are the sweetest, and that night proved it. My friends and I spent the next couple of hours completely immersed in the concert, singing along to every song, laughing, and occasionally nudging each other with knowing looks about the earlier incident. Matt couldn't stop whispering jokes about creating a tea defense squad for crowded events. Lisa, still giggling, kept replaying the moment in her head like it was a cinematic masterpiece. And me? I felt a quiet, smug satisfaction, knowing that I had navigated a potentially irritating situation with humor, strategy, and zero permanent damage. As the night went on, I noticed the line-cutting girl and her group in the crowd. They were somewhere near us, but keeping their distance, probably wary of any further tea attacks. It was almost comical. Her confidence from the line had completely evaporated. There was a subtle change in her posture, a slight hesitation in how she moved. I imagined her muttering complaints to her friends, replaying the incident, and realizing that maybe, just maybe, she'd underestimated the power of a strategically timed splash of tea. It got me thinking about life in general. We often let small annoyances, like rude strangers or minor disruptions, ruin our mood. But sometimes, all it takes is a little clever thinking, a dash of humor, and a tiny act of harmless revenge to turn frustration into satisfaction. That night, a simple cup of tea had done just that. By the time the concert ended, my friends and I were exhausted but euphoric. The music had been incredible, the crowd electric, and the memories, both big and small, etched into our minds forever. On the walk back to the car, we laughed over hot drinks from a nearby cafe, retelling the story like it was an epic saga. I realized that, in the grand scheme of things, the tea incident wasn't just about a line or a rude girl. It was about taking control of a situation, finding humor in the chaos, and enjoying the little victories that life throws at you. As we finally drove away from the venue, the city lights blurring past, I reflected on how rare it is to have moments that combine humor, satisfaction, and a touch of clever strategy. The tea incident had all three. It was a reminder that sometimes life's little annoyances can be turned into stories worth telling, memories worth sharing, and lessons worth learning. And so, in a strange, perfectly satisfying way, the night ended on a high note, not just because of the concert, but because of a small moment that turned irritation into laughter and chaos into triumph. The girl had been defeated, the line conquered, and we had a story that would be retold for years to come, complete with laughter, exaggeration, and the subtle moral. Patience, humor, and a little cleverness can go a long way. Sometimes, all it takes to survive the chaos of life, or a crowded concert line, is a hot cup of tea and the confidence to know exactly when to tip it.